Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well today. Today we are going to learn how to graph a cube root function. In order to graph cube root functions, it's going to be helpful to have a list of perfect cubes. Please take a moment to pause this video and record this table in your notes. In order to graph a cube root function, we need to follow two simple steps. Step 1, making a table of values, and Step 2, plotting the points and connecting them with a smooth curve. Let's take a look at the example of graphing f of x equals the cube root of the quantity of 2x minus 6 plus 1. Now, personally, I find it easier to graph integer coordinates. So you want to look at your radicand, the 2x minus 6, and make that a perfect cube, so when you take the cube root, you get an integer. So let's start off with making our table of values. And let's say I want to get a radicand to be 0 because 0 is a perfect cube. Well, in order to get 0 for my radicand, the 2x minus 6, I would have to plug in 3 for x because 2 times 3 is 6, 6 minus 6 is 0. So let's start off with plugging in a value of 3 for x. So when I do f of 3, I get the cube root of 2 times 3 minus 6 plus 1. Well, 2 times 3 is 6, 6 minus 6 is 0, so I have the cube root of 0, which is 0, plus 1, which gives me 1. Now, my next cube root after 0 is 1. Now, it's not going to be easy to get 1 since I have to multiply my value of x by 2. In order to get a cube root of 1, I would have to get 2x to equal 7. Well, that's not going to be an integer, so I'm not going to do 1. My next cube root after 1 is 8. So I would want 2x minus 6 to equal 8. Okay, so if 2x minus 6 is equal to 8, 2x would have to be equal to 14, which means x would be 7. So I want to find f of 7. When I plug in 7, I've got the cube root of 2 times 7 minus 6 plus 1. Well, 2 times 7 is 14. 14 minus 6 is 8. The cube root of 8 is 2. 2 plus 1 gives me 3. The next perfect cube after 8 is 27. Again, that's not going to give me an integer coordinate because of the 2 in front of the x. After 27, my next cube root is 64. Well, if I want 2x minus 6 to be equal to 64, that would mean that 2x has to equal 70, which means x is 35. So now I need to find f of 35. When I plug in 35, I've got the cube root of 2 times 35 minus 6, and then adding the 1 at the end. 2 times 35 is 70, minus 6 is 64. The cube root of 64 is 4, plus 1 gives me 5. Now I can also take negative cube roots. So that means that after my cube root of 0, when I plugged in 3 for x, I could also get a cube root of negative 1. Now to get negative 1, 2x minus 6 would have to equal negative 1, and 2x would have to equal negative 5. Again, not a whole number, or not an integer, so I don't want to take the cube root of negative 1, which means next I would try to find negative 8. Well, to get a radicand of negative 8, 2x minus 6 would have to equal negative 8, which means 2x equals negative 2, which means x would equal negative 1. So now I'd have to find f of negative 1. When I plug in negative 1, I have the cube root of 2 times negative 1 minus 6 plus 1. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2, minus 6 is negative 8. The cube root of negative 8 is negative 2 plus 1 gives me negative 1. I'd want to continue this process so that I have at least one more point, and my next cube root after negative 8 is negative 27, but because of the 2 in front of the x, I know I want to look for even radicands. So the after negative 27 is negative 64. If 2x minus 6 equals negative 64, then 2x equals negative 58. Well, 2 times negative 29 gives me negative 58. So I would now plug in 29, and f of 29 would equal negative 3. Now that I have several points and my table of values, I would continue on to step 2 and plot my points. Once you've plotted your points, you need to connect them and make a smooth curve. Now, when you make your graphs, you will need a larger graph because with the scale I have here, I cannot go out to an x value of negative 29 or 35. So when you're graphing these functions, please make sure to keep your scale in mind. When you graph a cube root function, it should also almost create an S shape. Please take a moment to pause this video, record this example and any questions you may have in your notes, and I will see you in the Zoom meeting shortly.